All right. Hey, everybody, it's Noel, and I can't actually remember which number podcast this is, number 8 or 9. And I'm here with Erin Stevens from lovely Murphy's, Calaveras County.
Murphy's, California.
Yeah. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Waking up with my cup of coffee.
Yeah, so it appears that, first, well, why don't we just start? So, who are you and what roles do you have in flow or juggling?
I'm Erin Stevens, and I've been juggling for 27 years, well over half my life now. And I am pretty involved with the community of juggling and becoming more involved with the flow community, which is exciting. And right now I work with the International Jugglers Association, and I've been doing that for about 8 years. I work with their social media and also with their international regional competitions, or IJA regional competitions, and everything else, lots of projects and such. And I'm also working with Flow Arts Institute now with social media and marketing, which has been a lot of fun. And I travel a lot, and I juggle a lot, and I perform and such.
Nice. So, well, one of the reasons I had you come on was I had a bunch of guys on my podcast. Well, I have a few women, but, trying to get the women quota up. Because, well, also it'd be nice to get some, non-binary folk at some point. That's a good future suggestion. But,
yeah.
I guess, why don't we start from the top? So, the IRC, which is the International Regional Competitions,
IJA regional competition.
I'm sorry, branded IJA regional competitions. Can you, and I'll just let our listeners know that I was welcomed to the board by Erin Stevens of the IJA. So the IJA, Erin got me on the board. But I just wanted to ask, so what is the plans? So as far as I know, you go to a city, you hold a contest, somebody wins, you take a bunch of media. That's what I got. So is there anything I'm missing? I'm sort of not a good way to describe it, but maybe is there, what exactly happens?
So the IJA regional competitions, in general, they take about a year to a year and a half of pre-planning to hold them. So it's finding the right host in the right region. And then it involves, a lot of marketing to get the word out and all that. And then we have a prelims competition now because originally we had them at the festival, but now we've started doing video prelims where people submit their videos of their routines, and then we have preliminary judges who now, because it's all online, we can get people like this year. It was like Jay Gilligan and Ori Roth and who else? Tom Wall, Florence. We did it this year too, and so it's then we narrow it down to the finalists. We go to the host festival, and then it's basically a show because it's a bunch of routines. That's what the competition format is. It's a routine competition, so it's not like best trick or something like that, but it's like a 5 to 8 minute routine that's choreographed to music and highlights both technical and creative juggling. And then you host the show, and there's 5 judges, and we get to have fun judges meetings and things like that to explain all the rules, which it's about 13 pages of rules. And then you have the competition. People win. They get, a prize money. They get the medals, and then they get a lot of promotion as well.
So can you name every single city that the IRCs have been to thus far in potentially chronological order? So, yeah, just...
All right.
Go ahead.
From the beginning. Here we go. 2011. It was in the middle of the Sierra Madres mountain range in Mexico. Not in a city at all. In a dirt field. And then year number 2 was 2013. We skipped 2012. It was in Santiago, Chile, and in Brazil, but I don't know the name of the city. I didn't actually go to that one. And then we had Guadalajara was where we started having it in Mexico. Then we had Lima, Peru. We had San Jose, Costa Rica. And then the next year we went to Bogota, Colombia, and Santiago, Chile again, and to a really beautiful national park in Israel, first time out of Latin America. back to Guadalajara. And we had Guatemala City in Guatemala. And I got this. We had Quito, Ecuador. We had Kabul, Afghanistan. We had Melbourne, Australia. Taipei, Taiwan. St. Petersburg, Russia. Any more? San Salvador, El Salvador. And Cotonou in Benin, Africa.
Wow. So crazy. And just for the listeners
so
to know.
27 now. 27 and 8 years.
So just listeners know, this is run through a nonprofit that you've been a part of for a while. And I know that to some extent the judging is similar to the judging that happens at the IJA festival. Is that true? Do they use the same rules?
Identical. Exact same rules, yeah.
Okay, so here's the big question. So what kind of benefits does a competition like this, aside from money and, like, you know, aside from that, like, what kind of benefits do you see competitive juggling providing these communities? Because that's something that, Yeah, so this is a topic I've thought a lot because I've spent a lot of time organizing a competition, and I've gone back and forth throughout 8 years of doing this of like, do I really love competition and juggling? Like, what are the benefits of competition and juggling? It's a question that comes up to me all the time. It's a question I've had to deal with internally because I love the art of juggling and I love the community of juggling, and sometimes competition can feel divisive. And so that part I'd never loved whenever I'd feel that happening. And so then it would be like reflecting on, well, what are the benefits? And what I've really seen, and Mexico is a great example because it's happened there 7 years now, is it's become an amazing motivational platform for people to progress very rapidly. And so the amount that I've seen the Mexican juggling community, and it's not just because of the IJA competition, it's because of their whole community has just really embraced circus and juggling as a whole. But the IJA has definitely been a part, like, you know, having the Tricks of the Month also has come out of holding the IRCs. Like, by having the IJA representative there, we meet cool jugglers that they were like, hey, we want to feature you and show your tricks to the rest of the world and things like that. And that's been really motivating too. But so, yeah, it's helped the communities, I feel, are working harder to progress faster because they have this goal. And like, I had a long talk with, I think it was Emil Dahl, because he had been a judge for the IJA competition. And he was like, I don't think I like competition for juggling. But then we talked a lot about it. And I said, you know, in Europe, they have schools, like circus schools, where basically your goal and your deadline is to train really hard to get really good to audition for that circus school. And I was like, basically an audition is kind of like a competition. You're going up against other people, you know, and you have this deadline and you have this time that you have to progress as much as you possibly can by that time. And then in Latin America or in Africa or in Afghanistan, they don't have these circus schools that you're training to compete to enter, you know, and getting as good as you can. So these competitions kind of have helped to fill that void of giving them a deadline to really get as good as they can quickly, which has been cool to see. Well, the other thing it's given to... Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. I want to hear your second point, and then I got another question.
Okay. The other thing that's been really cool to see is how much it's helped individuals progress. Like Fernanda Sumano is a good example. She was the very first gold medalist in 2011. And she was a hooper. And people were like, what? A hooper won the juggling competition? But she ended up, that like motivated her so much and inspired her so much that like she just kept pushing the levels, and she ended up becoming, you know, super popular hooper from Mexico, known worldwide. She's now performing all over Europe, and like it just kind of, she says, you know, that it helped launch her career in a whole new direction. And that's happened with various different competitors now, where that inspiration they had to participate then launched other inspirations into full-on careers in the future.
So, do you see any like downsides to competition? I'm getting a little bit of echo, but that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you know, like, I think the things that come up for me is, especially the day of the competition, there's so many emotions from everyone. Like, that's what I've really learned is competition creates emotion. And it's emotion for the judges. It's emotion for me as the organizer. It's emotion for the audience, for the people competing. Because everyone's going to have their own unique opinion. Like, when it's a show, you're just there to enjoy it, and maybe you'll critique it and things. But when you add that element of somebody's going to win, it just ups the emotional level so strongly. So, you know, people have been totally heartbroken, and like I've had to deal with the aftermath of total heartbrokenness. And, you know, there's constant debate. And again, I come back to, well, what are the positives that can come out of that? And I feel like the cool thing about the debate is it's creating conversation. And that conversation leads to future opinions and more discussion about juggling, which is good. But yeah, I think that's been the hardest part, is like the heartbroken folks. That's a hard one for me.
Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of...
I've also seen those heartbroken folks come back and win the next year, because that heartbreak then led to inspiration and led to them kicking butt.
So do you think, okay, here's a funny question. So flow arts kind of like avoids the word competition, it appears, as much as I recognize in its community, as I think sometimes maybe like access, like for example, anybody can access this. I would say juggling, most people can access it, but for flow arts, there's a wide variety of things that are attached to it. Do you think that a flow competition would be good for flow arts? Is that something that you think could be needed or would provide any benefit? Because this has come up repeatedly. There was a contest in Mexico once called Flowmaster, got canceled. There was also a team of producers here in the United States trying to potentially throw flow arts events. One of them at some of our events, and we kind of were like, nah, we're good. But I'm just curious. Do you think there's any benefit to flow artists getting more involved in competition?
I think, again, competition can serve a purpose, and it depends if that's the direction the general flow arts community wants to go. It is a culture that has been away from competition as long as I've known it, and so I could see it being a very odd transition to having competition be a part of it, and whether or not that would be a healthy addition. It's, I think experimentation is never a bad thing, like trying it and seeing how it goes. But like, yeah, I mean, and it's so community focused, I feel, flow arts, and like sharing focused, because it's also never been super focused on like in the festivals, at least, on the performance aspect and performers and bringing in performers. It's been about the workshops and teaching and sharing knowledge and stuff. So I think it's like going in the competition direction is totally different. But I wouldn't mind seeing like a full-on flow battle, like some badass chicks from a dragon staff person, meets up with a three-hoop juggler versus a whatever, like battles I could see being really fun in the flow arts.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that because, for example, there's some individuals that are more competitive. For example, Chris Kelly, I think, is openly competitive. I feel like he's attempted to be a part of the IJA stage competition multiple times, not made it, still tried, which is admirable. And even this year made it into the top 40 jugglers. And,
totally.
I just think about like how competition, like everybody's kind of doing it secretly. And I think that's the bigger problem, is that I think a lot of people are kind of competing not just with themselves, but choosing targets to compete with, but not really telling anybody that. And, like having a competition brings that to the forefront, especially like, okay, now we're really competing. I'm not just like saying it to myself in my mind. I'm actually like going out there and trying to compete against you. So,
and I actually have a chance to win in front of others, which is what competition's all about, right? Is that recognition.
Yeah, and I think losing, just as something kind of, there's a student of mine who was destined to be a part of some student council, we'll just say, at some point in my teaching career. And he didn't get it, but I think, and it was tragic because he was definitely probably more, well, not just that, potentially more equipped for the role. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's, so it's like that in judging too. And but then he seemed to learn a lot from that, and I would imagine that happens a lot in these competitions where I hate to be that guy that says the same thing everyone says, but like losing, you can learn potentially more because there's a lot more room for growth in there than winning, right? And winning, it's like, where do I go next? So
totally. Yeah, and I think if you're like open to the feedback, I think that's the key that I've seen, is like it's the people who at first are really angry, so they have that emotion that comes up, right? Are like super affected by the loss, because some people are like, oh, that was fun, whatever, I'm glad I entered, but it's those people that get really fiery afterwards, but then who are also willing to listen to the feedback of like the why, right? Like, why did this happen, and how does that inspire future growth, you know. There was this one kid, just an example, again, I think it was the first year he auditioned for the IRC Mexico, and it was a live audition at that point, and he told me later, he like, shit, like, I'm so good, I'm the best, and totally had this, like, mentality that he was the best. Didn't make it into the finals, like, totally didn't make it into the finals, heartbroken, crushed. I, like, don't even remember this guy from the first year, because, like, I think that was, like, the first day, and he probably was just, like, crushed the rest of the festival. Went home, so the IRC didn't happen again in Mexico for 2 years, 2 years, and it came back, and who won the competition? The guy who didn't make it to the finals because he'd, like, trained so hard and been so affected by it. And then also, because of that training, he ended up getting hired full-time by a circus performance company. Yeah, totally, I agree.
All right, so I got some other... So I don't want to go too down the normal pathways, but we should set it up here. So you're a woman, and you are a juggler. And I know that you've done multiple campaigns to potentially... I don't know if you're behind that Tricky Chicks thing. Is that you?
That's me.
Okay. Anyways, so you did the Tricky Chicks thing. There's this Flamingo Club you were a part of for a long time.
No, I've never really been active with Flamingo.
Oh, okay.
But
there's organizations that push females in juggling.
Yes.
I guess...
Ladies Malabaristas.
Started off... Or now the flow community has one. I've seen the hashtag Tech Queens appears to be a popular hashtag with the.
Gotta check that one out.
Yeah, Tech Queens. But and I was just wondering, do you think that it has been improving? Is it like is it where it needs to be, or what's the deal with that?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that's been super fascinating for me the last couple of years is. Not only have I been like really focusing on, before it was looking at what was happening in the U.S. like for the ladies dynamic, right? And that's all I knew and all I'd known the history of really, and also Europe, I guess, because those were the two kind of in the forefront of the jugglers' consciousness in the USA, anyhow. And yeah, like I just wrote a big post about this on Facebook that got like way more engagement or whatever response than I ever thought it would. But basically, like. I was told that juggling was 99% male when I first got into it when I was like 14 and went to my first festival. And I was like, what? That's crazy. And I did a ton of research on the why, like looking at the why of that and really evaluating what my perspective was of that. And it's been discussed to no end. But now on the international level, I mean, it's like I think things are really progressing in the U.S. Like you go to IJ, for example, this year was probably the most balanced male to female of the 10 years. Hey, director. Noelle Yee, director in the house.
I'm retired from all that. I'm retired.
But yeah, it was definitely like the most balanced male to female dynamic ever. And then like I just went to this festival in Paraguay where like it's attended by a ton of Argentinians, and in Argentina that's where they have the Ladies Malabaristas group that I like had partnered with. I found them online, I think in 2012, and we started making Ladies Malabaristas videos to put out through the IJA that just featured cool women from around the world. But what they were also doing down there was they would have all ladies shows, and they'd have all their ladies group going out and teaching workshops and all this stuff, and just really made a big focus on women and juggling and empowering other women with juggling. And then at the Paraguay Festival, it's been like tradition every year to have a ladies' night where it's all women performers. And they started off by saying, it was all in Spanish, so I was doing the best translation I could. But they basically said, the reason for this show is because historically shows have been hugely represented by males and very few females. So to offset, and thus that means the lack of inspiration for females. So to offset that, we have started this show that features only women to empower women and inspire the lady jugglers of the future. And everyone was like, that was the most powerful show of the whole festival, like super high skill level, amazing theme, about empowering women and all that stuff, which is really inspiring. And so because of that, literally 50-50 split of males, females in the festival, and the female skill level was like off the charts. I had never been to a festival where I saw so many good ladies. Like you usually have your handful of really strong women, but there it was just like so many good ladies and so many up and coming. women too, and so it's just cool to see how, because of that focus, it had totally shifted the balance.
Yeah, and I was thinking about, I had a thought, so I'm reading this book. Hold on one second.
Yeah, and I'm looking for my charger, just FYI, that's why I'm walking around.
Reading this book called The Master Within by
nice.
Master Chen. Look at this dude's face. Hilarious. But
awesome.
but basically, I was just thinking, like, so here's an analogy, I guess. So you have that, like, the yin and yang vibes going on. So, like, juggling is older, kind of more rooted in its, like, tradition of, like, just human existence in a lot of ways is juggling. And it's fairly technical, in my opinion, and performative.
Totally.
And sort of like one side of that. And then the other side is kind of like flow arts, you know, and also just say the gender balance is tended towards men in juggling overall, probably over the course of all of history. But then...
Yeah, depending on a couple places, but yeah, overall.
But like flow arts, I would say actually grows a lot more out of like either a complete balance between men and women, or even more women if you count hooping as the most popular of the flow arts, to be honest. You could say anything else is popular, but hooping is by far the most popular. And
by far.
I would say that field is predominantly, or still is, or not anymore, but used to be predominantly dominated by females. And it's kind of like you have both sides of this kind of clicking together here. And it doesn't mean that there's not women in juggling or there's not men in flow arts, but like, you know, the people that come there to flow arts, let's say, that are technically minded, usually move to that like dot in the yang over there, because that's kind of like a core tenet of a lot of juggling, is this technical framework that exists there. So they kind of like transmute over, that's like the literal word they use in this freaking book. They transmute them, they understand like, oh, okay, like I'm more into this like technical element, so now I'm more on this side of things. In a lot of ways, I've seen a lot of jugglers, to be honest, even probably a mixed balance of men and women, kind of move from juggling and kind of think like, oh, this is like a little more relaxed. I can feel open to learn all these things in like a different kind of environment that feels a little less barrier to skill environment, I guess. For example, if you're at a juggling event and you can't pass clubs and it's a club passing event and you're going to be outside of that for the most part, you know? And I've just seen a lot of this, like, people want to call flow prop manipulation, whatever you want to call flow arts. I don't really care. But, like, it's clearly, like, carved out a picture there for itself. And I just, like, do you agree that that's sort of true? Does it seem like there's, like, a lot of, like, ways that flow and juggling can and have recently balanced themselves out?
Yeah. I mean, it's similar, you know, again, like you said, juggling is super rooted in history, and flow's been this, like, newer movement over the last, how long ago was, like,
15, 20 years?
Very first time now. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It was like 20 years, you know. And so, and you compare that to whatever the insane history of juggling is. But I think what's cool, what I've seen at least, like, you know, I feel like the popularity of flow has in a way influenced a rebirth of popularity of juggling too, which is a cool thing. Like, because the energy was so high and like moving in a really strong modern direction with the flow arts, so juggling community had to step it up to make juggling get out of the antique ages, Antigua, and come into the modern age, you know. So I think that's been an influence. I also think, you know, especially in California, like I live in California, and I wasn't here when like Fire Drum started. I was watching it from Colorado, right? And I came back and I was like, oh snap, like talk about integration. And like, you can't go to a juggling event and not have flow. And you can't go to a flow event and not have juggling. So it's been super well balanced. Is my video like choppy?
Yeah, a little bit. I can still hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, no, okay. And I would say, just as history's sake, it seems like the West Coast in particular. Granted, I don't know exactly how hard people were trying in other places, but like between Humboldt Juggling Festival, Berkeley Juggling Festival, Portland, and then Mad Skills in Vancouver, Canada, like all those participants from each of those events, you know, used to and still do to some extent travel to all the events, and they're all basically flow juggler types. Like, they were jugglers and got into flow, or they're flow, then they got into juggling. Like, you know, I first met Kevin, he was just a contact juggler, and he had some, you know, Kevin Axtell for everybody, and he
Yeah.
had like, you know,
Yeah.
fans with feathers on them. That was like his flow extent for the most part, you know? Like he could do some
And
things.
contact juggling.
Contact juggling
was always very
I
flowy.
guess that's interesting. Contact juggling runs that line between flow. It is
Flow
it's that little dot in the
I'd
yin
say-
and yang.
yeah, totally. Totally. But he also just loved that kind of flowy style. But like club juggling, for example, didn't really have a flow style, but he like was immediately drawn to like Legos or things that weren't tossing, you know, like before the term flow existed. He always loved that style, which is cool.
Well,
But yeah, and
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say too that I think the West Coast is also a really good example of a community that embraced females sooner than other places in the U.S. And I think back to the first festival I was ever invited to perform at, and it was the Humboldt Women of Juggling Festival.
Oh yeah,
and
I have that T-shirt.
Yeah, and they ended up doing it for 2 years, and I was invited both years. But the first one was especially special because like the entire show was only women. It was like Olga Galchenko and Lana Bolin and like some really badass chicks. And then who else? What's her name? Oh man, I'm gonna blank on her name. But she used to perform with Luke Wilson, and she's amazing from Europe. But anyhow, it was a great lineup of all these amazing women, and I feel like that planted this seed that has been growing ever since in California. And then they did it a second year too, and I think, you know, and then they have like the Judy Finelli Award where they recognize, you know, Judy Finelli's influence on the West Coast scene, and like I just feel like there's been a focus on realizing that to get more females involved, you also have to have females involved and like show that there are females involved. And once you show that inspires other women to be involved. So I think the West Coast, both with the flow and juggling integration and also with the female and male balance dynamic, has really been active.
You just mentioned something kind of funny to me. You mentioned style. I actually feel like this is going to be a pretty drastic statement. I feel like juggling has not really had a style until, you know, sort of I guess you could go back, you know, the Jay Gilling and Sean McKinney days, but like Wes Peden, right? Like taking like the clothing you wear, taking the way, I mean, you could say he comes from a lineage. I'm not going to like ignore the guys that basically were behind him, but like dresses in a certain way, and that's what it is, and that's like a style. Like flow arts, on the other hand, has always had clothing and decor and how you dress yourself as a part.
Style that came with it.
Yeah.
Who your peeps are.
And it's interesting because like now clearly the juggling style is like loose white tee and sweatpants style is like the art, you know. It's sort of interesting, like the flow people that moved to juggling have now adopted the sort of like, you know, Wyatt Marvin crew style of sweatpants and loose shirt juggling, which is actually interesting because it's like another example of how flow has affected juggling style itself. Like it's kind of interesting. I'm not saying like people weren't wearing sweatpants before. That's like very normal for jugglers, but and dancers and whoever else. But more like looking like dancers, I guess, would be a way to even think about it. And I was just thinking like that's and like all the kids that dress, I'm not gonna say similar, but like have those. I was a girl I just saw in the recent IJA video, kind of has a like West Peden dress, sort of like loud, maybe that's like cultural, I don't know, but like loud shoes, like big shoes. I've seen lots of little dudes at the IJA with big...
was it the devil sticker?
Yeah.
The girl who did the devil stick? Yeah, and so again, like, and this was something I wanted to touch on too with the ladies, and I'll go back to this in a second, but the style thing, what I've noticed, because I've been traveling a lot throughout the world, is like, you know, when I first landed in Mexico, the first question people were asking me, do you know Wes and Jay? Do you know Wes and Jay? Do you know Wes and Jay? And like everyone loved Wes and Jay, right? And then I go to Chile and like, do you know Wes and Jay? Do you know Wes and Jay? And it's like everyone just like idolizes Wes so much in Latin America, which is understandable, and in the rest of the world, hands down. But because of that, like, you know, the Latin American style or juggling scene has really exploded in the last 10 years, and really like the last 7-8 years, and so because of that, and because Wes has been the number one person on the top charts like pretty much that entire time, you know, it's like that's been their main inspiration. And so you go to Chile and you have all the kids in the park with their flat brim hats and their cool skater style clothes and their clubs in their backpack and their big shoes and like super skater style, right? And it's like the cool thing to do in Chile. You also have 1,200 people at a monthly event every month juggling because the popularity of juggling is exploding down there. So it's like just seeing how his style has influenced that culture very strongly. And same thing with how they make their videos.
Yeah.
Even the types of tricks that they do, all kinds of things.
That's great.
So that's interesting. Yeah, and I think in you can say it in Asia too. But again, those are cultures where the skater type of style that like, because I've talked a lot to Wes about like his style, and he really loved skater videos, you know, as a kid and as a teenager. And so when he started making videos, he modeled them after that skater style, and really like used those for his research rather than looking at other juggling videos. And that's what inspired his kind of video creation. And so, and that's where like in Asia, for example, that style is already really popular, and so is West. You can see that in their videos and stuff too.
Ah, okay. Oh, go ahead. You had something else to say about women there. Yeah, go ahead.
About the women, yeah, it's just like, you know, so this year I've been to a lot of really different countries, one to the other. Like I went to Taiwan, El Salvador, Russia, Mexico,
right.
Afghanistan, Benin, Africa, and Paraguay. And every single one is just so starkly different. One's the next culturally, how their juggling scenes are. I've also been looking at like what their flow scenes are like, because that's totally at the forefront of my brain right now too. And also in the lady dynamic, like where are women within that juggling community? So like in Russia, for example, they have this like ancient circus family history, right? And basically, no matter what gender you are, you're born into a circus family, you're going to be a circus performer. So you have all these examples of phenomenal female jugglers in Russia. So I showed up there and I asked the question to my host, who was a woman. I was like, so would you say like it's pretty balanced, women, male to female? And she was like, oh yeah, like normal, obviously, you know. And it was, and like the festival was super split gender-wise. And also, like, you know, they have, in general, I felt like women were treated equally with respect and in the job force and all kinds of things like that within the Russian community. But then you go in stark contrast to Benin, Africa, where women are just starting to get rights. You know, they have like this history where they had 14 rulers, but they stopped paying attention to two of them. One because he sold 10 million slaves to America, and one because it was a woman, and you can't recognize women as political leaders or whatever. So like that was just an example to me of like, oh, okay, women are not so much respected in this culture. 0 female jugglers in this country, right? Like, and there weren't a lot of jugglers in the first place, but definitely very few women that were involved or interested. And you know, I ended up teaching I think 3, and I was like, yes. Score. Yeah, and then like Afghanistan, totally interesting there because they have this circus program that's existed for 15 years now, and when it first started, the women weren't allowed to be involved in any of it, and then the government said, okay, women can sing and they can juggle, because those were the 2 things that were the least sexy, like the least that could be sexualized, like acrobatics or aerial or hula hooping or anything else could be like sexualized, and juggling could be sexualized. So the women were allowed to juggle, but only in like, they have this circus program in like in 9 different provinces now, but only 4 of the provinces allow women to be part of the circus group. But so in Kabul, the women, like I think it was 4 years ago, I saw the first post on the Afghan circus page saying, for the first time in history, the women have won every single competition in our national competition, because they couldn't do these other things. They just focused on juggling the whole time and became super badass. And so now they're passing 9 clubs and juggling 5 clubs on top of a table, on top of a rolla bola, or walking globe. And they're also the ones getting like invites now. This girl Rabia just got an invite to go perform in Germany for a month because she's awesome. So anyhow, it's just interesting looking at those gender things and like how the culture accepts it, and then how the juggling community reacts to like that gender dynamic of the general culture.
So we have about 5 minutes here. I actually have to run to a rehearsal.
No, sweet. That sounds fun.
Yeah, it's not going to be bad. I enjoy the people that I'm rehearsing with. It's more like getting there.
Oh, good.
Oh, my beard is really weird in this. What the?
It's a good beard. That is a good looking beard right
like
there.
angle. Looks like it's like waxing. Anyways, okay. So, final thing here is, I guess my last question for everyone is like, so if you had a message that you would want to pass along to, so France set this up a little bit. So it's like, I do things, maybe you do things for like this legacy vibe, even if like, as I forgot about you and helping with the IJA, you will be forgotten very soon after, the things have happened. For example, being a board member for 4 years of running one of the more successful events in the past decade, I'm sure will be forgotten by next month. And I just...
Except for by me. It'll always be in my heart. No,
yeah, but it's okay. I want to be like the wolf. You can just call me to save a festival someday, It's like come striding in. But I was thinking, like, what kinds of things would you want, like, to leave as a part of, like, your legacy? I'm not talking about, like, I'm sure there'll be many Erin Stevens awards at some point in time, but like, guaranteed, man. Oh, just watch out. But I'm just curious. Yeah, it's bound. It's gonna happen. There's no chance. Look at all the other people. Anyways, like, what would you want to leave behind? Like, what would you want people to remember? Whether it's from your work, not just about you necessarily, but like, what kind of work message would you want to leave behind?
Yeah, I think what I've learned the most, like, through my work with the IJA, and part of this comes from the dramas that come up when you're on the board member, as you know, or when you're on the board, is that I feel like the juggling and, in general, performing arts community is very ego-focused, because, people need to create their skills, and they need to present them, and they need to be the best, and they need to do this and that. And I think for me, like, it was a few years ago, maybe 2014, that I really saw an example of a very strong ego in our community, and I realized, like, that's not what I want to be my driving force within the juggling community, within the work that I do. Like, and I really made a big shift from it's about me and it's about my show and it's about my rewards to it's about us and it's about the community. And the more we focus on the community, the better all of us are in general. And if you hurt me, that's okay, but I don't, like, you can hurt me all you want, but don't hurt my community. Like, don't hurt my peeps. That's not okay with me, and I think that's what I hope more and more jugglers, and like what I'm seeing now is, like, for example, my marketing team just grew to 5 people for the IJA this year, and it was people who came to me and said, I love the work the IJA is doing. How can I be involved? I want to help this movement for the community, and that's like such a cool thing, because in the past nobody wanted to help the IJ, nobody wanted to do work for free, and now because people are so excited about the community and like what's happening within the community, people want to give their time and energy towards that. So yeah, I guess let go of some of that ego, make it be about something bigger, and focus on what we can all do together rather than what you can do by yourself.
Amazing. Well, on that note, Erin, you stick around for a minute. I'm gonna shut this thing down, but. Well, thank you, Erin Stevens, for joining me for the Sticks Out podcast. You may not be able to see it because you haven't given me $1 a month on Patreon, but I'll... Oh,
snap. I better give you $1 a month.
Yeah, I just got one new person yesterday. First one in 3 months. My friend Dylan. I think he felt bad for me. You should have seen this.
But I did donate to the Flow, to fund the Flow Arts.
Oh, see, that's a good... Yeah, that's something, again. I was more thinking, okay, we should talk about this afterwards. By the way... Thank you again, and we'll talk soon. Stick around, Erin. I'm going to turn this thing off. Stop recording.